A very good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you're from. I welcome you all back to session 8 of day 4 on current trends in contemporary literature, criticism, theories, and practice of the 7-day online international faculty development program on language and literature, a pragmatic approach. I welcome Dr. Saravanan R., principal and patron of the program, Dr. Shakila Matthew, Dean Academics, Head Department of English and convener of the program, Mr. Logesh Kumar S., Administrative Officer, members of the Faculty of English of VET Institute of Arts and Science, and the teaching fraternity of English language and literature from around the world to the session. I take much pride in welcoming Dr. S. Henry Kishore, the resource person of the session. A multi-talented man is the one who is a master of many disciplines. Dr. Kishore, Associate Professor and Head Department of English, Sri Krishna College of Arts and Science, Coimbatore, bears testimony to this statement. It gives me immense pleasure in welcoming this illustrious academician whose profile includes Bachelors of English, Masters in English, Linguistics, Psychology, Philosophy and Religion, and Mass Communication and Journalism. He has earned his doctorate from Alagappa University, Karaikudi. Further, he has cleared NELTS, National English Language Testing Service from CIEFL, the now EFLU, A1, A2, and B1 levels in German language from Goethe Institute, and is also a certified trainer from Business English Certification. He started his career as a lecturer at Charan Arts and Science College and ascended the academic ladder by the dint of his hard work and served in various capacities in reputed institutions like Banariamman Institute of Technology, Satyamangalam, PSG College of Technology, and Tyagarajar College, Madurai. Besides, he has also worked as a sub-editor in Deccan Chronicle, Hyderabad, and sub-unit commander in Tyagarajar College, Madurai. This adroit researcher's insatiable interest in Derrida enable him to publish his book, Derridian Difference and Buddhist Shunyata. He has published and presented numerous papers and articles in national and international journals, conferences, and UGC-sponsored seminars. To help students shape their personality, he has delivered lectures and organized workshops and training sessions also. As a cadet of NCC, he has undergone basic military training at Officers Training Academy, Maharashtra, 3 months pre-commission training at Seamanship School, Southern Naval Base, and has attended more than 6 combined annual training and Navy Sainik launch camps. Sir, you truly are a man of disciplines. We're all excited to listen to your session on current trends in contemporary literature, literary criticism, theories, and practice. It's all yours now to deliver the talk, sir. Just a minute, sir, you're on mute.
So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much, ma'am, for the wonderful introduction. And dear participants, I'm very happy to be associated with VET Institute of Arts and Science. And I'm here to deliver your FTP lecture on current trends in contemporary literary criticism, theories, and practice. So before I begin, I would like to give you the roadmap of my lecture for the day. So in the beginning, I would like to introduce you to what literary criticism and what literary theory is. And after that, I would like to give you the difference between literary criticism and literary theory. And then we shall get into the various types of approaches to literary criticism and the various theories that are vogue in the present. And let's carry the discussion further. Okay, first, so a kind of a brief introduction to literary criticism. The term literary criticism is most often a kind of misunderstood, okay? More than the literary criticism, the term criticism, okay? So by criticism, we often misunderstand it as an act of finding fault, okay? When somebody tries to censure us, we say, don't criticize me. And it is also a kind of an act of disapproval. And this definition of criticism, okay, is not literally taken in literary criticism, wherein in literary criticism, we use the term in a different way. So, by literary criticism, we mean the act of interpreting, analyzing, and making judgments of individual and comparative work of works of art, such as literature. So, we use literary criticism to better understand the work of art, especially literature. So, literary criticism is also a critical comment on the work somebody has written. And sometimes it is given as a review. If you had seen in book magazines and dailies, we have a book review or an article or an essay. So this expresses a kind of an analysis and judgment on the work of art. Okay, so what is literary criticism? Literary criticism is the interpretation and analysis, classification, and ultimately the judgment of literary works. It is usually in a form of a critical essay, and it can appear in literary magazines as book reviews, and we consider that as a criticism of a work of art. And as I have been telling, it examines a particular work and it may look into the writer's work as a whole. So it will compare and contrast whatever the writer has written. So it will give you a kind of a comprehensive view to understand a work of art. Now, who is a literary critic? A literary critic is not someone who merely evaluates the worth or quality of a piece of literature, but rather he or she is someone who argues on behalf of an interpretation or understanding of the particular meanings of literary texts. The task of a literary critic is to explain and attempt to reach a critical understanding what literary texts mean in terms of their aesthetic as well as social, political, and cultural statements and suggestions. So it is the work done by a literary critic. A literary critic does not, no, he does more than simply discuss or evaluate the importance of literary text. Rather, a literary critic, he seeks to reach a logical and a reasonable understanding of not only what a text author intends for it to mean, but also what different cultures and ideologies render it capable of meaning. So this is the job of a literary critic. And now let's move on to what is literary theory. A very basic thinking about literary theory is that these ideas, the theories, act as different lenses the critics use to view and talk about the art, literature, and even culture. So basically, a literary theory is like a lens, okay, that one wears to analyze a work of art. So these different lenses allow critics to consider works of art based on certain assumptions within that school of theory. So the different lenses also allow critics to focus on particular aspects of work they consider important. So uh, a, a work of art can be analyzed using various lenses. So you can apply uh, various theories to analyze a particular work of art. And literary theory proposes particular systematic approaches to literary texts that impose a particular line of intellectual reasoning to it. For example, a psychoanalytic literary theorist might take the psychological theories of Sigmund Freud or Carl Jung and seek to reach a critical understanding of a novel such as Ernest Hemingway's For Whom the Bell Tolls. So, This novel by Ernest Hemingway, For Whom the Bell Tolls, can also be analyzed under Marxist perspective using Marxist literary theory. And it can also be analyzed using deconstructive theory or any theory you are willing to employ. So next, let's take the discussion to another very important point. What is the difference between literary theory and literary criticism? See, modern literary criticism is often informed by literary theory, which is the philosophical discussion of its methods and goals. So, literary criticism is, in a way, helped by literary theory. Okay, literary theory helps the literary critic to analyze the work better. Okay, so the two activities, that is literary criticism and literary theory, are closely related. And literary critics are not always and have not always been theorists. So you need not be a literary theorist to criticize a work of art. Okay, so you can employ the theory proposed by someone else. So that's the difference. So a literary critic need not be a literary theorist. Some critics consider literary criticism a practical application of literary theory because criticism always deals directly with particular literary works, while theory may be more general or abstract. So, to explain this point a little further, see, literary criticism is an application of any literary theory. Okay, so literary criticism always deals with a particular literary work and a particular problem, but literary theory, it is more general and it is more abstract. A theory, literary theory, is the process of understanding what the nature of literature is, what function it has, what the relation of text is to author, to reader, to language, to society, and to history. So it is not a judgment, but an understanding of the frames of judgment. So now, having seen the difference between literary criticism and literary theory, we shall uh, get to know many of your professors. You already know what I'm trying to arrive at. Okay, so let's briefly look at the types of literary criticism. See, a broad division of literary criticism can be made between the types of criticism that is available. So the four great broad division of literary criticisms are: first, practical criticism; second one, theoretical criticism; third, descriptive criticism; and fourth, prescriptive criticism. See, these four types can be grouped into two classes. That is, practical and theoretical criticism can be in one group, and descriptive and prescriptive criticism can be in another group. Now, let's further go into the details. Practical and theoretical criticism, first group. Practical criticism, it focuses on the examination of individual text. So it will look at a particular text, practical criticism. It will analyze the stylistic aspects and the way the words are used and the structure and all that. While theoretical criticism, it discusses the nature of literature and the relation between literature, critics, and society. So theoretical criticism, it goes into the relation between complex subjects like the critics, the society, and the literature in general. So this is the first group of literary criticism, the practical and theoretical criticism. The second group is descriptive and prescriptive criticism. Descriptive criticism, it tends to explain the piece of literature as it is. So it describes in its original form, while the prescriptive criticism argues on how it ought to be. So the way it is descriptive, and the way it should have been is prescriptive. So that is the second group, descriptive and prescriptive criticism. And there are uh, broadly four major theories, four major literary theories. See, all the theories which you perhaps know can be put under these four major categories. So the four theories are, the four categories of theories are: first one, mimetic theory; second one, pragmatic theory; third one, expressive theory; and the fourth one, objective theory. Okay, so miming, I think you all know. So mime is a kind of an imitation. Okay, so I will explain each and every theory. These four theories come under four different worldviews. For example, the mimetic theory, the realm of mimetic theory is the universe and the world. And the realm of pragmatic theory is the audience. And the realm of objective theory is the text. And the realm of expressive theory is the author and the artist. Now, first we shall take up mimetic theory. Mimetic theory sees a work of literature as it is reflecting the universe like a mirror. See, when we had started learning literature, maybe in our first day in our first BA class, definitely the professor would have discussed what is literature. And definitely we would have heard this most often quoted sentence: literature is a mirror of life. So, what you see in life is gets mirrored in literature. So, the mimetic theory looks at the works of literature as it is reflecting the universe like a mirror. So, it regards literature as imitating or reflecting life, and therefore emphasizes on the truth and accuracy of its representation. So, mimetic theory plays lots of significance on the truthfulness, on the accurateness of an author's representation in the work of art. So, that's why it is said that it is realism in general sense. So, mimetic theory is realistic, it is true to life. So, mimetic itself, the word mimetic itself means imitation. And this word, mimesis or mimetic, was first used by Aristotle in the 4th century BC. So, where he states that tragedy is the imitation of an action. Tragedy is the imitation of an action. So, the first theory, the first broad category of theory is mimetic theory, which considers the work of art as truthful and accurate representation of life. And if there is any deviation, this theory would come to the rescue. And next, we move on to the pragmatic theory. The pragmatic theory sees literature as designed to achieve its effects on the audience. The instructions, the aesthetics, and the joy that is involved in the work of art that is not found in the work of art. And the pragmatic theory, by considering all these the effects on the audience, it tries to judge the work of art according to the successful achievement of this assumed aim. See, as professors or as students of literature, you must have definitely studied the quality that you must have come to know the two words dulce and utile. Okay, so dulce, it is from the word dulcimer, which is a musical instrument. So that gives the what shall I say? It gives the aesthetic aspect of any literature, and utile is utility. So any work of art should have both enjoyment and also it should be useful to the people to whom it is written. Okay, so this pragmatic theory emphasizes on the reader's relation to the work. The work is treated as something that is constructed to achieve certain effects on the audience. So the effects may be for aesthetic pleasure, instruction, or any kind of emotion. So the pragmatic theory gives lots of emphasis on the audience, on the result of the work. And the third, expressive theory. See, the expressive theories, they center around the artist. Okay. So you might have also heard art for art's sake. An artist is free to express himself in the way he likes. No rule and no instruction and nothing can bind an artist to a frame. Okay, so expressive theories, it is centered on the artist, and the wordsworth definition of poetry as a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings is typical, and nearly all romantic of the 19th century criticism generally regards art as primarily concerned with expressing the poet's feelings or the psyche. So, the expressive theory considers the work of art as an expression of the artist's inner and core self. So, the expressive theory examines text as an expression of the writer's feelings, imagination, and personality. Expressive theory tends to judge the work by its sincerity or the extent to which it has successfully revealed the author's state of mind. Romantic critics such as Coleridge and Wordsworth, they were expressive critics in this sense. And at this juncture, if you would like to go deeper into the expressive theory and what it holds, you can read Coleridge's Biography. Okay, that is a wonderful work. And then we move on to the fourth type of theory, the objective theory. In this objective theory, the focus is more on the text. And at this juncture, I would like you to understand the difference between the term the subjective and the objective. Subjective is something more personal. Okay, expressive theory no is tend to be a kind of a subjective one, but objective, you are no without the influence of the writer or without the influence of the reader. So you are quite objective, neutral maybe. So the text here is supreme. And once the text is produced, the writers frizzles out, and the only interpretation to be gotten is what can be inferred from the text. The direct message which the text itself has, which has to be inferred within the text. So this theory, you have the Roland Barthes propagating the author is dead. Okay, once the author publishes his work of art, he has no say to what he has said. Okay, when critics or when the readers interpret that he has written or based on this, the author cannot come and say, no, 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 I didn't mean this, you have misunderstood, this is what I meant. No, nothing can be done, okay, according to the objective theory. So, to the objective theorists, to them, there is no correspondence between the universe and the work, and we cannot know the true nature of either the audience or the author. So, objective theory tries to understand the work of art as it is, okay, without the influences of the writer or the reader. So we have seen now four theories. So the four theories are, let me revise for you. So mimetic theory, pragmatic theory, objective theory, and expressive theory. And most of the contemporary literary theories can be put into any one of these four classification. Okay. Now let us proceed to the various approaches to literary criticism. So my next topic is the approaches to literary criticism. See, traditionally, okay, so this lecture is on the contemporary literary theory. But I'm not going to simply focus on the contemporary theories alone or contemporary approaches alone, because we need to know something about the past. Okay, only from the past we have evolved. And let's take up the traditional approaches first. Let us revise it. Okay, what our earlier, those who have studied literature before us, okay, the bygone years, how did they approach literature? So the traditional approaches are historical approach, biographical approach, and the moral and philosophical approach. What is this historical approach or biographical approach? See, historical approach tried to get some explanation of the work of art from the biography or from the history of the times or biography of the author. Now, let's see. A history or biographical approach views literature as the reflection of an author's life and times, or of the character's life and times. So it says, this is where you can employ, a kind of historical study of the work of art. You can use the socio-political history or author's personal history. So any work of art will be read as a kind of an autobiographical expression of the author, according to this approach. And it is necessary to know about the author and the political, economical, and sociological context of his times in order to truly understand his works. For example, if you like to understand Dickens' novels, so you need to know the impact of industrialization and how the newly emerging cities had an effect on the people. So that is the kind of historical and biographical approach wherein you ought to study the biography of the author in order to understand his work. And as students and as teachers of literature, this is the easiest thing that we do in our classes. Suppose if a poem is prescribed for study, what do? First, we teach the students, or the students learn about the author, and then we go to the text, his poem or novel or whatever it is. Now, what are the advantages and disadvantages of this historical and biographical approach? Uh, First advantage may be the works, this method, no, this approach, it works well for some which are obviously political or biographical in nature. Okay, so most of the autobiographical writings, which are heavily influenced by uh, the authors like, for example, R.K. Narayan's Malgudi Days. Okay, so this town Malgudi and Raipuram is a kind of an amalgamation of his experience of the city of Madras and the Rayapeta where he must have lived. Okay, so in order to understand the works of R.K. Narayan, if you could understand his biography, then you will understand his work in a better light. So first advantage of historical or biographical approach is that it works well for some, some works which are obviously political or biographical in nature. And the places of allusions in their proper classical, political, or biblical background can be understood, no, by this approach. Now, what are the disadvantages? You have the great disadvantage, the intentional fallacy. That is, this approach tends to reduce art to the level of biography, and it makes it relative to the times. No, it will not make the work of art a kind of a universal one. So literature is universal. Okay, what is experienced by one person in one particular part of the world, if that is chronicled in a literature, when somebody else reads in another part, he should be able to feel the same kind of feeling. That kind of universality will be lost if you follow this historical biographical approach. And next, we shall move on to the moral or philosophical approach. So this approach asserts that the larger purpose of literature is to teach morality and to probe philosophical issues. So, using this approach, the authors tend to instruct the audience in some way. So, we would be analyzing the work for its utility. Okay, utility. How as no, how this work is useful to the society. So that is the main focus of the moral or philosophical approach. And the advantages of moral philosophical work is that it is useful work for works which do present an obvious moral philosophy. And it is also useful approach when considering the themes of works. And this approach does not view literature merely as art, isolated from all moral implications. And this approach recognizes that literature can affect readers and that the messages of work is important. So anything that you write, it should create or it should stir the people and it should have an end. And what are the disadvantages of this moral and philosophical approach? The first disadvantage is such an approach tends to be too judgmental. Okay, and some believe that literature should be judged primarily and if not solely on its artistic merits and not its moral or philosophical content. Okay, so if the author has used the words in such a beautiful manner, then we should appreciate for its beauty the way in which he has used the language to create maybe the musical quality or like that. So such works may not give a kind of a moral instructions. So just because it does not give any moral instruction, we cannot discard it. But this approach will discard it. So we have seen now two traditional approaches, and now the main part of our discussion, the modern approaches. Okay, the current literary theories and the current approaches which we are using to analyze the works now at present. Okay, there are various approaches like you have reader response criticism, you have moral formalist criticism, you have deconstructionist criticism, you have psychological criticism, you have gender criticism, you have cultural criticism, you have cultural criticism, you have gender criticism, you have culture. You can no kind of you can treat each every one of it as a approach. So first, let's take up. So now, what we are entering into is the wonderful world of literary theory. Definitely, this literary theory will shine a light on literature. So, of course, there are. You cannot simply say these are the only approaches. There are myriad approaches. Okay, and it is very, very important to note that no single theory is necessarily correct or true or it is above the other. Okay, so if you are using this particular lens, okay, good. But when somebody uses another lens, you cannot say only my way of approach is good and yours is wrong. No. Okay, because we have number of approaches, and critical approaches usually derive from personal discretion or applicability. So as a literary critic, as students of literature or as teachers of literature, when we sit down to analyze a particular work of art, we will have to use our personal discretion, okay, and judge which method or which approach would be suitable for that particular work. So you'll have to see the applicability of the theory, okay. And for certain works, for example, if you have novels from Russia, definitely you can read it as a kind of no, under Marxistic lens. It's Marxistic lens, okay. And that is the reason why some approaches are no, they naturally lend themselves to particular works. So for this particular work, definitely you can use no, this particular criticism or this particular theory. So like that, you can easily judge. And now let's take up one by one. First is reader response theory. And this reader response theory, it attempts to describe what happens in a reader's mind when interpreting a text. Okay. And this reader response theory, it recognizes the plurality of text and it explores the contradictions inherent in the problem. And I'll give you a kind of an example. For example, way back uh, in the early 1900s, I.A. Richards, who is well known for new criticism, he was teaching English in China. And he wanted to teach the Chinese students Daffodils by William Wordsworth. He removed the title Daffodils and he gave only the text to the students. And in nowhere in the poem Daffodils, you find a mention that the poem is about daffodils except in the title. And when the students, they read the poem, I saw 1,000 at a glance, like that, as the poem goes. Each and every student, some imagined 1,000 ants, some imagined something else. So like that, each and everybody understood, the text for what it is. Okay, for words, what it means. And they presented their ideas to I.A. Richards, and I.A. Richards said, yes, it's all correct. And you can say, my dear Dr. Richard, this poem is about daffodils, but this gentleman has not even mentioned one word about daffodils. And how do you say that his interpretation of this poem is correct? But he said, yes, it's correct. Because according to this reader response theory, it is the response or a reader's response to the text is counted. Okay, so if you analyze any work of art using this particular theory, you will not be worried about the biographical criticism or the biography of the author or the history of the times in which he has written. No, you will take the text for what it is and the effect on the audience. Okay, so that is the first contemporary theory that we are looking at, reader response theory. And second is formalistic criticism. This criticism, it gave birth to what's called structuralism. It's a kind of an offshoot of the developments in linguistics. Okay, you might have, as teachers of English, you would definitely know how Ferdinand de Saussure, who initiated a common framework for linguistics, a common framework to understand the various languages in the world. So the same kind of attempt was used to study the structure and form of the works. Okay, so this formalistic criticism, it regards literature as a unique form of human knowledge to be regarded in its own terms. Okay, it's anything that if you're writing an epic is naturally different from a novel or from a short story. So each form has its own uniqueness, and you study it for its the structure. So, apart from the above biographical, social, and historical or cultural influences, in the formalistic criticism, literature is understood through its intrinsic literary features. Okay, so this criticism is text centered, it focuses on words, okay, the various forms any work of art can take. So that is the formalistic criticism. And formalistic criticism regards literature as a unique form of human knowledge, as we have seen, and it is focuses on words. So what it does is it does a kind of a close reading of the text. Okay, it focuses on the intense relationship in a work, the form and content. It cannot be meaningfully separated in when you know read a text very closely. The interdependence of form and content makes the text literary. So if you are a formalist theorist, so you will look at the work, no, you will look at the text, you will look at the text and you will focus all your attention on the text, and you will focus your attention on the words. So most of the stylistic study of any work of art comes under this formalistic criticism. And next we have this psychoanalytic criticism, or the uh, developments that happened in psychology, especially by, as I told you in the beginning, by Sigmund Freud and Carl Jung. It developed the psychological criticism, and the psychological criticism owes much to the works of Sigmund Freud, and wherein the repressed memories of the childhood, how it comes out in the adulthood, how it is expressed in the works of art. So all that, you analyze a work of art psychologically. So the Freud and other psychologists, the followers like Carl Jung, they believe that great literature truthfully reflects life more so the inner life. There are a kind of three approaches in psychological criticism. First one is the creative process of the arts. Okay, what is a genius and how is it related to the mental function, and how does the work impact on the mind of the reader? Okay, and the second approach is the psychological study of the artist. So you look at the impact, the psychological impact of no the work. Okay, and what are the psychological aspects that are revealed, okay, through the work. What you can learn about the psychology of the artist. And the third approach in psychological criticism is the analysis of fictional characters. So uh, definitely Hamlet or Shakespeare would not have heard of this word psychology, but after 500 years of Shakespeare, we still analyze Hamlet's in under the psychological criticism. We do a psychological study of most of the Shakespearean characters and so on. Of Freud's analysis of Oedipus, the Oedipus complex, and all that. So, psychological criticism is employing the findings of psychology and using it in literature to analyze how the mind and the behavior expressed by the characters are, how does it fall in place with the mental makeup. So that is a psychological criticism. And then you have methodological criticism. See, this methodological criticism, it seeks recurrent universal patterns, and it combines insights of many disciplines. Okay, for example, you take the case of Helen of Troy. Okay, the whole war, the Trojan War, happened because of one person abducting the wife of another. Now, we can also see a kind of a parallel in our own land, that is India. So Ramayana, okay, you can read Ramayana and the Helen of Troy. Helen can be equated with Sita, and you can draw a kind of universal parallels. Okay, so this mythological criticism, it combines insights of anthropology, psychology, history, and comparative religion. Okay, and mythological criticism explores what is common humanity as opposed to the individual emphasis in psychological criticism. So it is, though it employs psychological criticism perspectives, it is different. So it is somewhat quite opposed to the individual emphasis that we place in psychological criticism. And in the mythological criticism, you take care, or you analyze, you bring out what is called the archetype. Okay, you look for symbols. Okay, you look for characters or situation or images that evokes a deep universal response. Okay, Carl Jung, no, he was a kind of a lifetime student of myth and religion, and he brought out this what is called collective unconscious. And we can use the Jungian psychological, findings to understand any work of art. And a very famous study that is available in the world of literature is the Carl Jungian analysis of Nagamandala. Okay, so so this kind of drawing of universal patterns is under the mythological criticism. And then you have the sociological criticism next. So sociological criticism, it examines literature in the cultural, economic, and political context in which it is written or received. So the emphasis is on the cultural, economic, and political context. Okay, so it is more or less drawing on the historical and biographical criticism of yesteryears. And this approach or this theory believes that art, it cannot be created in a vacuum. Okay, so there ought to be a concrete relationship between the author and society, and how the social status of an author affects his writings, and how the social content of a work, okay, how it presents values, and it also looks at the role of audience in shaping literature. Okay, so under the sociological criticism, you also have the Marxist criticism, which is economic and primarily economic and political. And under Marxist criticism, you examine the economic and political aspects, and it also explores the ideological context of content of literature. The content determines form, and therefore all art is political. So, what is the danger of the sociological and Marxist criticism? It is quite imposing, critics politics on the work in question, and in a way, it can sway the evaluation based on how closely the work endorses that ideology. And what is the value that we can arrive from this criticism is that it eliminates the political and economic dimensions of literature that other approaches they may overlook. And another very important current trend in literary criticism is gender criticism. And gender criticism examines how gender identity influences the creation and reception of literary works. So, under this gender criticism, you can fix in the feminist criticism, and the queer theory, which is very much debated in the modern world, and so on. So this gender criticism began with the feminist movement, and it was influenced by sociology, psychology, and anthropology. And feminist critics see a world saturated with male-produced assumptions, and this gender criticism tries to correct the imbalance by battling patriarchal attitudes. And this feminist criticism also analyzes how an author's gender influences ideas, and also how gender identity influences the reader. So reader sees text through the eyes of his or her gender. Examination of social forces is responsible for gender inequality. And this, of course, it was very much alive in the 1980s, deconstruction. Deconstruction is criticism. And many of us, when we hear the term deconstruction, we are left perplexed. Okay, so what deconstruction does is it rejects the traditional assumptions that language can accurately represent reality. See, according to a deconstructive critic, a language cannot represent reality accurately. Okay, so it says that language is fundamentally unstable. Okay, so literary texts therefore have no fixed meaning. Okay, so what deconstruction does is it tries to decenter the Western centered thinking. Okay, and it talks about the science. Okay, science cannot coincide with what is signified, so that is the actual expression of what is being expressed. You call a rose by any name and still it is a rose. So that is what deconstructionist criticism is all about. So wherein the attention shifts from what is being said to how language is being used in a text. Okay, so they don't concentrate on what is being said, but they are concentrating how a language is being used in the text. So deconstructive criticism often resembles, a kind of a paradoxical understanding, and it involves close reading that you had seen earlier. So deconstructive criticism rejects the idea that author has control over the language. And Roland Barthes and Michel Foucault, they call for the death of the author. No author, no matter how brilliant, can fully control the meaning of a text. And they also call for the death of literature as a special category of writing. Merely, no, literature is merely words on a page. All texts are equally untrustworthy. So that's their opinion. So therefore, literature deserves no status of art. So they just know whatever we hold as dear, the deconstructionists, they just destroy everything, and they allow the text to have a kind of a free play. Okay, so the ultimate thing is no truth. There is no truth. There is only a kind of rival interpretation. And another important thing that is currently in vogue is cultural studies. And these days, you also have a PG program on cultural studies. So this one is a kind of a very recent interdisciplinary field of academic study, and it is not full and full. It is associated with literary text. Okay, it is not a study of fixed or aesthetic object, poems or paintings. It's a kind of a dynamic social processes. Okay, the challenge of cultural studies is to identify and understand the complex form and effects of the process of culture. So this cultural study is deeply anti-formalist in nature, and it investigates the complex relationship among history, politics, and literature. And it rejects the notion that literature exists in an aesthetic realm, separate from ethical or political categories, and it views literary analysis as a means of furthering social justice, and it examines the cultural studies, it examines issues such as race, class, and gender, etc. And you have all these theories are there, and you have post-colonial theory and structuralist and post-structuralist theory, which are a kind of an umbrella terms, wherein deconstruction can come under this structuralistic or post-structuralistic theory. And post-colonial theory is the literature that is written after the end of colonization. So post-colonial theory is, when you use this post-colonial theory lens, it focuses on the idea that texts deal with social and cultural struggle of Black or the native people against the oppressors. So if you use post-colonial theory, you're trying to bring out, and the literature that you study, it exposes the negative portrayals of Black people and their absence generally in white literature, and how the literature is Eurocentric. Okay, how the marginalized and the voiceless are denied voice. All that can come under post-colonial theory. And the text deals with cultural, regional, social, and national differences in values and experiences. And colonial countries and people are represented in text, how they are represented by the Western writers. Okay, and the post-colonial writers, when they write about their own cultural identity and what kind of cultural clash they experience. So all that can be studied under post-colonial theory. Structuralist and post-structuralist, it is not interested so much in when a text was written or who wrote it and all that. So belief is that we use language not simply to describe the world, but also to construct it. And in literature, the only thing that really matters is how the text is constructed, its form. Okay, structuralism pays lots of importance to the form, its overall structure and the patterns of language in it, especially the pairs of opposites. So deconstruction, it plays lots of emphasis on binary pairs, okay? And how one pair, see, when we examine the pair, no, God, a good and evil, male and female, how one binary is more privileged than the other, all that they study under structuralist and post-structuralist theory. And this is kind of the last slide. I'm going to finish it. So we are used to, hashtags. Okay, so to understand theory in its own, in the modern sense. So feminist theory is the girl power, and the psychoanalytic theory is you know, crazy or a kind of a mind games. Cure theory, it's okay to be you. Okay, you and you can analyze Magesh Dattani's plays, no, especially on a muggy night in Mumbai, using this cure theory and so on. And that is, you come to know or you come to terms with your own sexuality. Okay, and Marxist theory is how capitalism is really bad and how it no makes the poor poorer and the rich richer and all that. And new criticism, new historicism, it is about how history repeating itself, and moral philosophy is about good and evil. So with that, I come to the end of my lecture. I know within a span of 1 hour, it's very difficult to present, all that is there in the modern critical theories. It's a kind of a difficult job, but I think I have done some justice to the work that was entrusted to me. And if you have any questions, you can ask me.
Thank you, sir. That was undeniably a wonderful session. I'll now post select questions from the audience. Can you suggest some theories for partition literature?
Pardon?
Could you suggest any theory to apply for partition literature?
Partisan. Yes, okay. See, partisan can be looked at under any theory. You can use psychological theory to analyze the psychological sufferings by the people, okay, especially the minorities, like Sikh people who were butchered in Pakistan and the Muslim people who were butchered in India. So the trauma that they've undergone can be studied in the psychological criticism. And the economic losses, okay, happened in both the sides. Okay, the migrants who migrated from Pakistan to India and from India to Pakistan. So the economic loss can be studied under Marxist criticism or other thing. And you can use formalistic criticism to study how he has used words to express the anguish, express the sufferings, and so on. So, as I was telling, you can use any theory, okay, to understand a particular work of art, because any work of art will render itself to any theory that you employ. Okay, definitely you will find either one or two aspects of a particular theory that you're employing in any particular work of art. I hope I have answered your question.
Yes, sir. The next question, can you shed some light on animal studies? I repeat, sir, can you shed some light on animal studies? Animal studies.
I'm unable to hear you.
So So I think there are two computers or two sessions open nearby.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yes, sir. One of the participants would like you to elaborate on animal studies.
Yes, ma'am. See, this is no another. If you look at no Ted Hughes, okay, he has used lots of animal imageries in his work. The poem that he's written or any other thing, no, that has come out of Ted Hughes, you have a kind of lots of imageries which are closely related to the animal worlds. See, studying animal imagery is no, it tends to focus on the eco-criticism or eco-critical analysis of the work. So, ecosophy or ecological criticism is gaining vogue in the in the present age wherein we are facing with issues such as global warming and so on. So definitely by studying the world of animals, how animals are portrayed in literature and the relations of animals with the human characters, definitely you can make a kind of very nice ecological criticism. I think I have answered your question.
We have one question repeatedly asked both on YouTube and Zoom. How do we easily differentiate between criticism and theory?
Yes. So this is the first aspect that I clarified before I went into my lecture. See, literary criticism is the employment of literary theories to understand the work. So literary theory is something general. Okay, literary criticism, you take the particular concept from there and you employ it. So theory is something general. Criticism is something unique, wherein you draw from the theory and you employ it. Okay, so that is the whole body, and literary criticism is your individual expression or individual use of a particular thing.
Next one, sir. Is there any other approach to a literary text than applying a theory?
See, literature can be studied even without a theory. Okay, so the traditional approaches, okay, they don't necessarily use a theory. Okay, so if you're reading the work and you're interpreting the work for what it is without particularly employing any theory, then definitely it will go under the traditional or the earlier way of approaching the work. So wherein you study the work for itself without the influence of no other theoretical knowledge. Okay, that can also be done. Definitely, if you are if you like to read literature for what it is, definitely you forget about theory. You can enjoy literature just simply just going through it and coming out of your own interpretation of uh, the text. But again, when you come out of with such a criticism, definitely it will fall under some other theory which is already available. So there is no escape from theory, whether you want it or not. It will definitely be categorized under some theory, if not by you, at least by the readers who read your criticism.
We'll have another question, sir. Under which theory can we relate emotional intelligence?
Pardon, ma'am, can you?
Under which theory can we relate emotional intelligence?
Emotional intelligence and all that can become no, brought under psychological criticism, because the positive psychology, okay, which is a kind of a recent trend which has produced lots of self-improvement books and so on, So definitely that will go under psychological criticism and the advances in psychological criticism.
Thank you,
Yes,
sir.
ma'am.
That will be it for the Q&A. Really thank you on behalf of the organizing committee and appreciate the dedicated efforts that you've put in to go an extra mile through your kindness and generosity to enrich the teaching fraternity who are present here. Thank you for being with us here today, sir. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Now, dear participants, the link to post your attendance cum feedback will be posted in the chat box of both Zoom and YouTube. This link will be active only for the next 1 hour, within which you will have to fill in. You may copy the link and leave the meeting, or you may leave the meeting after filling in your details in the form. I thank you for your participation in this session. We'll meet you for another session tomorrow at 11 a.m. Indian Standard Time. Until then, goodbye.